What if I told you that a much quieter and far more significant action was in progress while everyone was fixated on Bitcoin ETFs, halving cycles, and the never-ending din of crypto headlines? A deal had already been set in motion long before the public ever noticed. The United States government, the world's most powerful financial institution, took this action rather than traders or influencers. What if I told you that the hints have been there in front of you? Dispersed over public documents, changes in leadership, changes in valuation, and strategic alliances, all of which point to Ripple. I'm going to take you through a theory today that is so coherent and convincing that you won't be able to ignore the pattern once you see it. This is an examination of the participants, the timing, and the mechanics of one of the most important possible financial movements of the decade. It is not hopium. You must first comprehend the government's playbook in order to comprehend what might be going on at the moment. In order to establish technological dominance, the US has already made a calculated move into a private sector enterprise. They gained power at Intel decades ago. More recently, they stabilized rare earth supply chains by implementing strategic measures centered on MP materials. The federal government intervenes if there is a threat to the nation's digital or physical infrastructure, frequently in a covert manner, through middlemen, frequently, and almost always unnoticed until long after the event is over. They start by identifying a danger to key infrastructure. Second, they invest in or collaborate with organizations that manage that risk. Third, they institutionalize control by influencing the regulatory environment. Furthermore, when you look at contemporary financial infrastructure, from liquidity management to cross-border payments, Ripple is right at the nexus of banking institutions and technology. International collaborations and government-aligned staff. This isn't a coincidence. This pattern is consistent with how the U.S. However, the true tale is about the individuals who moved from the U.S. government to Ripple's orbit, not merely Ripple as a business. Let's begin with one of the most significant figures, former U.S. Treasurer Rosie Rios. More U.S. currency bears her signature than virtually any other person in history. Where did she go after leaving the office? Straight to the board of Ripple. Coinbase, Kraken, or any other cryptocurrency company were not selected by the lady who was in charge of the country's cash operations and was literally the custodian of the US dollar. Ripple was her choice. Rosie Rios is just the beginning, but that should be enough to get us to think. Then there's Michael Barr, the vice chair for supervision at the Federal Reserve, and a former advisor to Ripple who went on to become one of America's most influential financial regulators. Consider the importance of it. A person who later joined the Fed was more than simply a casual consultant for Ripple. Their technology, legal framework, and worldwide placement were all grasped by someone who is currently influencing U.S. banking regulation. Transitions like these don't happen by accident. They occur when a technology is incorporated into the policy apparatus. However, it doesn't end there. One of the best legal brains in the business, Stuart Alderode, the chief legal officer of Ripple, has been known to visit the White House. Consider the implications of that. Visits to the White House are not informal get-togethers. These are gatherings with legislative strategists, economic experts, and policy architects. Additionally, these visits coincide with important regulatory debates concerning digital assets. They don't have any influence. Executives aren't flying around flaunting their partnerships. When these individuals work for a single organization, they construct legal frameworks, arrange transactions, and lay the groundwork for trillion-dollar financial institutions. There is no denying the signal. At the highest levels of your being, Ripple is connected. Let's now discuss the valuation incident that may have been the largest breadcrumb of all, but that nearly everyone missed. Everyone should be wondering, why now? In light of Ripple's strategic funding through the Fortress and Citadel ecosystem, which led to a $500 million fundraising at an astounding $40 billion value. Why would Fortress, a company well known for its participation in distressed assets, structured deals, and institutional positioning, be involved in this particular valuation? The company Ripple is not in distress. Liquidity is not a problem for Ripple. This rise was not necessary for Ripple to survive. So why did they raise the money if Ripple didn't need it? because sometimes the goal of a rise is price discovery rather than capital. You can't just buy XRP on the open market for some kinds of customers, particularly institutional or sovereign buyers. The system would crash as a result. Rather, a structured valuation event is required to create a baseline, a precise recorded valuation that states the value of the asset, ripple, equity, and ecosystem. You would require a valuation if a big bidder were planning to purchase partnership rights, influence, or structured access to an escrowed asset. We also received $140 billion. That figure did not appear out of thin air. It has a function. The most intriguing aspect of all is Ripple's enormous XRP escrow, which holds over 40 billion XRP. This escrow is frequently misinterpreted. Although many believe it to be merely a locked supply system, it is actually far more adaptable. It functions similarly to a structured vendor credit system, a type of treasury that is not only sold on an exchange but may also be distributed under contractual agreements. Stated differently, it can serve as a method of value transfer, independent of spot market purchases. In theory, agreements pertaining to escrow, access, allocation, and release schedules might be made by governments, institutions, or big businesses without causing a market catastrophe. The gratis vendor notion is applicable in this situation. According to this theory, value can be transferred without the need for direct purchases by utilizing Ripple's escrow as part of a strategic agreement. This is how a government would quietly, rationally, and without making headlines get exposure to XRP, liquidity, technological infrastructure, or future settlement capabilities. Additionally, the timing of Ripple's legal disputes, regulatory meetings, and political personnel changes almost perfectly aligns with this strategy. With careful planning surrounding this escrow. Now think about the larger picture. The loss of power over the monetary infrastructure is disliked by the US. The government cannot afford to let foreign systems like China's digital yuan to control cross-border payments since they are fully aware of how the global financial environment is evolving. Ripple is already integrated with banks all around the world, thanks to its network of hundreds of institutions. It would not only make sense for the US to partner with Ripple or acquire strategic influence over the company in order to retain control over international settlement systems. It would be essential. The Clarity Act comes into play at this point. The majority of people only consider it to be a regulatory structure. On closer inspection, however, it offers something much more significant. Time, cover, and structure. A story. There is more to regulatory clarity than just rules. It's about making it possible for significant financial transactions to take place in a systematic manner. An asset that authorities deem unclassified cannot be the subject of strategic agreements. Labels, definitions, and frames are necessary. That atmosphere is provided by the Clarity Act, and once it is in place, strategic transactions, regardless of how they are structured, can take place without confusion. This is the theory, explained simply. The regulatory framework is taking shape. The participants have been positioned, the value has been established, and the staff has switched between federal and Ripple institutions. The United States has a history of covertly acquiring critical assets before the public ever learns about them, and the escrow is specifically made for structured value deals. When you combine all of these data pieces, a picture starts to take shape, of collaboration rather than chance. What happens if the announcement is about when rather